The kitchen hummed with a controlled chaos. My wife Sarah moved with a practiced grace, orchestrating the final stages of our Thanksgiving feast. The aroma of roasted turkey, mingled with cinnamon and something sweet, probably her mother's infamous cranberry concoction, filled the air, a familiar comfort. Outside, the November sky threatened snow, a heavy gray blanket pressing down on our small suburban home. It was supposed to be a normal Thanksgiving. The usual cast of characters: Sarah's parents, always impeccably dressed and politely reserved; her sister, Carol, with her two kids, Levi and Nora, a whirlwind of energy and whispered secrets; and us, just us. Carol was a complication. Even on good days, she carried an air of barely contained restlessness, a sense that she was always on the verge of something bigger, something more exciting than the quiet rhythm of family life. She'd been married to Mark for almost a decade, a solid, dependable guy, but you could always sense Carol's slight impatience with his predictability. Sarah and I had been together for 8 years, married for 5. We were the steady ones, the ones who built a life on shared laughter and quiet evenings. Thanksgiving at her parents' house was a tradition, a ritual of togetherness, but this year I felt a subtle shift, a barely perceptible tension in the air. Maybe it was just the looming weather, the oppressive grayness mirroring some unspoken unease. The doorbell rang, a sharp, insistent sound that cut through the kitchen's gentle clatter. Sarah, wiping her hands on her apron, gave me a small, slightly strained smile. "That's probably them," she said, her voice a little too bright. Them was Carol and the kids. They were always a package deal, a trio of contrasting energies. Carol, always impeccably styled, even for a casual family gathering. Levi, 7, all boundless curiosity and mischievous grins. And Nora, just 5, quiet and watchful, her thumb often finding its way to her mouth when she was overwhelmed. But when Sarah opened the door, it wasn't the usual boisterous entrance. There was a silence, a heavy, unsettling quiet that spilled into the hallway. Sarah's face, usually warm and welcoming, tightened with confusion. I stepped closer, peering over her shoulder. Levi stood in the doorway, his small hand clutching Nora's. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide and scared. Behind them, the porch was empty. No Carol. "Where's your mom?" Sarah asked, her voice a careful blend of concern and disbelief. Levi's lower lip trembled. He looked at Nora, then back at Sarah, his small shoulders shaking. She said she had to go," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Go? Go where?" Sarah's voice was rising now, the carefully constructed facade of holiday cheer crumbling. Nora, her thumb firmly in her mouth, just stared at us, her eyes reflecting a confusion that mirrored our own. She just left," Levi said, the words coming out in a rush, like he was trying to get them out before they choked him. "She packed a bag and said she'd be back later, but she didn't take us." The words hung in the air, a cold, sharp blade cutting through the warmth of the kitchen, the promise of a happy gathering. My stomach dropped. I felt a sudden, sickening lurch, a sense of disbelief that quickly morphed into a cold, hard knot of dread. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening in horror. She left you here? Alone?" Levi nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. Nora finally started to cry, a small, heart-wrenching sound that shattered the fragile silence. I knelt down, trying to meet their gaze, to offer some kind of comfort, some anchor in this sudden storm. "It's okay," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "You're safe now, you're with us." But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't enough, not nearly enough. This wasn't a delayed arrival. This wasn't a last-minute change of plans. This was something else entirely, something wrong. The scent of roasting turkey, once so comforting, now seemed to mock us, a cruel reminder of the normalcy we had lost, the family gathering that had just dissolved. Thanksgiving, the day we were supposed to be together, had just become the day everything fell apart. The initial shock gave way to a kind of frantic, quiet activity. Sarah, her face still pale, ushered Levi and Nora into the living room. The bright, cheerful decorations, paper turkeys and hand-drawn pictures, suddenly felt out of place, a stark contrast to the children's subdued demeanor. "Come on, sweeties," Sarah said, her voice softer than usual, leading them to the couch. "Let's get you settled. Are you hungry? Thirsty?" Levi shook his head, his eyes darting around the room, as if expecting his mom to reappear at any moment. Nora, still clinging to Sarah's hand, just nodded slightly, her thumb still a constant presence. It fell to me to try and make some sense of the immediate situation. While Sarah focused on the kids, I called her parents, explaining the bare bones of what had happened. Their reaction was a mix of disbelief and a kind of stiff, restrained concern. I could hear the unspoken questions in their voices. What does this mean? What's going to happen now? After the call, I felt a weight settle on my shoulders, a sense of responsibility that was both overwhelming and strangely necessary. These kids were here, they were scared, and their mom, for whatever reason, had left them. The next few hours were a blur of trying to create some semblance of normalcy. We made them some simple food, turkey sandwiches, which they ate quietly, picking at the edges. We found some blankets and pillows, turning the couch into a makeshift bed. We tried to distract them with a movie, a cartoon that usually had Levi bouncing off the walls, but even that seemed to fall flat. Levi, usually so talkative, was withdrawn, his brow furrowed with worry. He kept asking about his mom, his voice small and fragile. "When is she coming back?" he'd ask over and over again. Sarah would hug him tight, her own eyes glistening. "Soon, honey," she'd say, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. Nora was different. She was quieter, more withdrawn. She didn't ask questions. She just watched, her big eyes taking everything in, her thumb her only comfort. It was heartbreaking to see such a small child so lost. As the evening wore on, the reality of the situation began to sink in. This wasn't a temporary babysitting gig. This was something bigger, something more complicated. Carol wasn't coming back later. She had left her children, and we were the ones left to pick up the pieces. I found myself doing things I hadn't done in years, reading bedtime stories, tucking blankets around small, shivering bodies, whispering reassurances that felt hollow even as they left my lips. Sarah, usually so composed, was a mess of barely contained tears and fierce protectiveness. The weight of it all pressed down on us. The cheerful holiday decorations, the half-eaten feast, the looming snowstorm outside, it all felt like a surreal backdrop to this sudden, unexpected drama. We were stepping into a void, a place where the rules were unclear and the future was uncertain. But amidst the confusion and the fear, something else was growing. A sense of protectiveness, a fierce determination to shield these kids from the worst of it. They were here, and we were here, and somehow we would figure it out. The house settled into an uneasy quiet. Sarah had managed to get Levi and Nora to eat a little more, some leftover mashed potatoes and a bit of the turkey. They were both huddled on the couch, wrapped in blankets, their eyes glued to the TV, but I could tell they weren't really watching. Their little faces were tight with worry, their bodies tense. Sarah sat beside them, her arm around Nora, occasionally stroking her hair. I found myself pacing, the questions swirling in my head, a relentless storm of why and how. I needed to understand what had happened, not just for myself, but for these kids. "Did your mom say anything else?" I asked Levi, trying to keep my voice gentle. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. "Not really," he mumbled. "She just said she had to go, that she'd be back." "Did she seem upset?" I pressed, trying to find a crack in his fragile composure. He shrugged, a small, helpless gesture. "I don't know, maybe a little. She was on the phone a lot yesterday. On the phone a lot." The words hung in the air, a small, insignificant detail that suddenly felt significant. I remembered Carol's phone calls. She'd always been a bit secretive about her calls, stepping away from the room, lowering her voice. But yesterday it had been different. There had been a tension, an urgency in her tone that I hadn't noticed before. "Do you know who she was talking to?" I asked, my heart starting to pound. Levi shook his head again. "Number, but she sounded mad, I think. And then she was crying. crying Madam on the phone a lot. It wasn't much, but it was enough to paint a picture I didn't want to see. My mind started to race, connecting the dots, filling in the blanks with possibilities I had tried to ignore. Later, after the kids were finally asleep, Sarah and I sat in the kitchen, the remnants of our abandoned Thanksgiving dinner still on the table. The silence between us was heavy, thick with unspoken fears. I called Mom and Dad again, Sarah said, her voice low. They don't know anything. They're just shocked like us. Did you talk to Mark? I asked, the question hanging between us like a fragile thread. Sarah shook her head. He's not answering his phone. I left him a message, but... Her voice trailed off, the unspoken words hanging in the air. But I don't think he knows either. A knot tightened in my stomach. Mark, Carol's husband, the quiet, dependable guy. If he didn't know, then what? What could possibly make a mother leave her children like this? Levi said she was on the phone a lot, I said, the words coming out in a rush. Sounded mad, crying. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. On the phone? Who? I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. I didn't want to say it, didn't want to give voice to the ugly suspicion that was forming in my mind, but I couldn't keep it in any longer. I don't know, I said, my voice barely a whisper. But I'm starting to think maybe it wasn't just about having to go. Sarah stared at me, her face pale and drawn. What do you mean? I took a deep breath, the weight of the unspoken truth pressing down on me. I mean, maybe there's someone else. The words hung in the air, a cold, hard accusation. Sarah didn't say anything for a long time. She just stared at the table, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. No, she finally whispered, her voice shaking. No, that's not possible. Carol would never... But even as she said the words, I could see the doubt in her eyes, the flicker of recognition that mirrored my own growing fear. The uneasy quiet of the kitchen stretched into the night. Sarah and I sat there, the weight of my unspoken suspicion hanging heavy between us. The half-eaten Thanksgiving dinner, now cold and congealed, seemed to mock the festive atmosphere we had tried to create. We need to know, I finally said, breaking the silence. We can't just sit here, not for the kids' sake. Sarah nodded slowly, her face etched with worry. But how? Carol's not answering her phone. Mark's not answering. Where do we even begin? I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. We start with what we know. Levi said she was on the phone a lot. We try to figure out who she was talking to. Her phone records, Sarah said, her eyes widening slightly. Maybe we can get her phone records. It wasn't a comfortable thought, prying into someone's private life, especially her sister's, but the image of Levi and Nora's scared faces pushed aside any hesitation. This wasn't about gossip. It was about understanding, about protecting them. I don't know how easy that will be, I said, but it's a start. In the meantime, we can try to find her phone. Maybe there's something there. We searched the house quietly so as not to wake the kids. We checked the living room, the dining room, even the guest room where Carol had stayed. It was a strange, almost invasive search, sifting through the remnants of someone's life, looking for clues to a mystery we desperately hoped wasn't true. Finally, in the pocket of her coat, Sarah found it, Carol's phone. It was locked, of course, with a password we didn't know, but even holding it felt significant, a tangible piece of the puzzle. Maybe we can try some common passwords, Sarah suggested, her voice barely a whisper. We sat at the kitchen table, the phone between us, a silent, accusing presence. We tried birthdays, anniversaries, common words. Nothing worked. The screen remained stubbornly locked, a barrier between us and the answers we sought. Frustration mounted, mixed with a growing sense of dread. The more we failed to unlock the phone, the more convinced I became that there was something to hide. Why else would Carol protect her privacy so fiercely, even in a family setting? Then Sarah remembered something. She has a tablet, she said, her eyes widening. She always uses it to check her email. Maybe she's logged in there. We found the tablet in the guest room, tucked under a pile of magazines. It was unlocked. A wave of relief washed over me, quickly followed by a sense of guilt. We were invading her privacy, but the need to know outweighed the discomfort. Sarah opened the email app, her fingers trembling slightly. There it was, at the top of the inbox, a message from an unknown number simply titled Tonight. The date and time matched the day Carol had left. Sarah hesitated, her hand hovering over the message. Should we read it? She whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. I nodded, my throat tight. We have to. We have to know what she was thinking. Sarah opened the email. The message was short, but its implications were devastating. It confirmed our worst fears. Carol was having an affair. The words on the tablet screen swam before my eyes. A short, simple message, but its impact was like a physical blow. The room seemed to shrink, the air thickening with a sense of betrayal and disbelief. Sarah's hand covered her mouth, her breath catching in her throat. "Oh no," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No, this can't be real." I couldn't speak. I just stared at the tablet, rereading the message, as if somehow the words would change, the meaning would shift. But it remained stubbornly, undeniably true. Carol was having an affair. The implications of that single, devastating fact crashed over us. Carol hadn't just had to go. She had chosen to leave, to abandon her children for someone else. The casual cruelty of it, the sheer disregard for her own kids, was staggering. A wave of nausea washed over me. I felt sick, not just at Carol's actions, but at the thought of what this meant for Levi and Nora. They were already scared, confused, clinging to us for comfort. How would they react when they learned the truth, the real reason their mother had left? "We can't tell them," Sarah said, her voice firm, despite the tears streaming down her face. "Not yet. They're too young. It would break them." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. She was right. We had to protect them, shield them from the worst of it, at least for now. But the secret felt heavy, a burden we now carried, a wedge driven between us and the children, between Sarah and her sister. The silence stretched on, broken only by Sarah's quiet sobs. I wanted to hold her, to offer some comfort, but I felt frozen, paralyzed by the weight of what we had discovered. How could we move forward? How could we pretend that everything was okay when everything had just shattered? "We have to tell Mark," I finally said, my voice hoarse. "He deserves to know. He's their father." Sarah nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "Yes, but how? He's not answering his phone. What if he already knows? What if this is why Carol left?" The thought hung in the air, a chilling possibility. What if Mark knew about the affair and it had somehow driven Carol away? What if their marriage had been crumbling for a while and we had been too blind to see it? The questions spiraled, each one leading to another darker possibility. We were caught in a web of deceit and betrayal, and the more we learned, the more tangled it became. The night wore on, the hours passing in a blur of shock and disbelief. We didn't sleep. We just sat there, the tablet between us, the damning email glowing in the darkness, a constant reminder of the secret we now shared. The burden of knowledge settled heavily on my shoulders. I felt trapped, isolated, caught between my loyalty to Sarah and my growing protectiveness towards Levi and Nora. I knew we couldn't keep this secret forever, but the thought of revealing it, of exposing the truth, felt almost as terrifying as the betrayal itself. The morning dawned, a pale, weak light filtering through the snow-covered windows. Levi and Nora were still asleep, their small bodies tangled together on the couch, a fragile picture of innocence amidst the chaos. Sarah and I sat in the kitchen, the tablet still lying on the table, a silent witness to the previous night's discovery. We hadn't spoken much. The weight of the secret, the implications of Carol's actions, hung heavy in the air, a barrier between us. How could we talk about this? How could we explain the inexplicable? "We need to talk to Mark," I said again, my voice hoarse. "He has a right to know." Sarah nodded, her eyes red and swollen. "I know, but I'm scared. What if he already knows? What if this tears the whole family apart?" The fear was palpable, a shared dread of the fallout that was sure to come. But the thought of keeping this from Mark, of letting him remain in the dark, felt equally unbearable. As if sensing our unease, Levi stirred. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, his brow furrowed with a familiar worry. Nora, still deeply asleep, didn't move. "What time is it?" Levi mumbled, his voice small and scratchy. "Morning," I said gently, offering him a small smile. "Did you sleep okay?" He shrugged, his gaze fixed on the tablet on the table. "What's that?" Sarah and I exchanged a look, a silent conversation passing between us. How much should we tell him? How could we explain this to a 7-year-old without shattering his world? It's your mom's tablet," Sarah said carefully. "We were just looking at something." Levi's eyes widened. "Did you find out where she went?" The question hung in the air, a simple, direct plea for the truth. But the truth in this case was a complicated, painful thing. "Not yet, sweetie," Sarah said, her voice strained. "We're still trying to figure things out." Levi's face fell. He looked down at his hands, his small shoulders slumping with disappointment. I felt a pang of guilt, a sharp ache in my chest. He deserved answers, but we didn't have any good ones to give. "She said she'd be back," Levi whispered, his voice barely audible. "She promised." The word promised hung in the air, a fragile, heartbreaking reminder of a broken trust. I knelt down beside him, trying to meet his gaze. "I know she did, buddy," I said gently, "and we're going to do everything we can to find out where she is. But in the meantime, you need to know that you're safe here, you're with us, and we're going to take care of you no matter what." Levi looked up at me, his eyes searching mine as if trying to gauge the sincerity of my words. Then he did something unexpected. He leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper, and said something that changed everything. I heard her talking," he said, his small hand gripping mine tightly. "On the phone, the night before she left." Sarah and I froze, our breath catching in our throats. This was it. This was the moment we had been waiting for, the piece of the puzzle we desperately needed. "What did you hear, Levi?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He hesitated, his eyes darting between us, as if unsure whether he should be telling us this. I wasn't supposed to hear," he said. "I was getting a drink of water, but I heard her talking in the hallway." "What did she say?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. Levi took a deep breath, his small brow furrowed with the effort of remembering. She was saying she was tired, that she couldn't do it anymore, that she wanted to be with someone else. The words hit me like a physical blow. Someone else. It was confirmation, undeniable proof of what we had suspected all along. Carol hadn't just left. She had left for someone else. The air in the kitchen crackled with a sudden, sharp tension. Levi's words hung between us, a stark, undeniable truth. Sarah's face crumpled, her eyes welling up again. I felt a cold anger rising within me, a sense of betrayal that went beyond Carol's initial departure. "We have to tell Mark," I said, my voice firm. "He deserves to know, and we can't keep this from him any longer." Sarah nodded, her jaw tight. "I know," she whispered. "But how?" "He's still not answering his phone." I took a deep breath. "We go to him. We drive to his house. We have to do this face to face." The drive was silent, filled with a heavy anticipation. We didn't know what to expect, how Mark would react, but we knew we had to be there for him, to support him through whatever was coming. Mark's face, when he opened the door, was a mixture of confusion and exhaustion. He looked like he hadn't slept. As we spoke, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. His shock turned to a quiet, devastating sadness. The weight of Carol's actions settled on him and on us all. The news spread quickly, a ripple effect through the family. Carol's parents were stunned, a mixture of disbelief and anger clouding their faces. There were phone calls, hushed conversations, a sense of a family unit fractured. Mark moved in with us temporarily, the quiet, dependable man now carrying a heavy burden of sadness. Levi and Nora clung to him, their small hands seeking his, a silent plea for comfort and stability. The days that followed were a blur of trying to create a new normal. School runs, meals, bedtime routines, all done with a sense of underlying tension, a constant awareness of the missing piece. The laughter was less frequent, the smiles a little strained. Levi and Nora, though resilient, showed signs of the strain, nightmares, a sudden fear of being alone, a constant questioning about their mom. We tried our best to reassure them, to provide a safe and loving environment, but the shadow of Carol's actions loomed large. The days turned into weeks, a slow, steady march forward. We settled into a new routine, a strange mix of sorrow and resilience. Mark started looking into legal options, the complexities of custody, and what Carol's absence meant for the kids' future. Sarah and I found ourselves becoming more like parents, helping with homework, attending school events, trying to fill the void Carol had left. There were moments of joy, small victories amidst the sadness, a shared laugh, a good grade, a quiet evening where the house felt almost normal. But the questions lingered. What would happen to Levi and Nora? Would Carol ever come back? And how would we all move forward, carrying this weight of betrayal and abandonment? The future stretched before us, uncertain and unknown, a path we had to navigate together. Time passed, and the edges of the initial shock softened, replaced by a new reality. Levi and Nora stayed with us, their laughter slowly returning, their trust in us growing stronger. Mark visited often, his presence a comforting constant in their lives. The absence of Carol remained, a quiet ache, but it no longer defined us. We had become a different kind of family, forged in the crucible of unexpected circumstances. Love, not blood, bound us together. We learned that family isn't always what you're born into, it's what you build, what you choose. And though the path had been painful, we had found a strength and a connection we never knew existed. The holidays were different now, quieter, but filled with a deeper meaning.